this is an option for photographing your 2D work. I will be demonstrating with a print specifically, but you can do this for any 2D work, like works on canvas, ink on paper, things like that. This option is probably the most economic and most easily accessible. All you need is some kind of device to take photos with. I will be demonstrating with my iPhone. You can also use a point and shoot camera. Those work great too. Some natural window lights, some foam core. This is a single sheet of bright white foam core that's been cut in half, and a table that's pretty much close to the same height as the window, can be a little bit above. The idea is that you want to be able to look down and be able to coordinate the height of the camera without, you know, having to get on top of a stool or a chair or something. And this method works best for works that are smaller than 11 by 14, give or take. If your work is larger than that, it might be better to put it up on a wall, and this method will be a little bit trickier to manage with it. You may want to do the controlled lighting method that I'll show you guys later on in that case. But if your work is smaller, this is a 8 by 10 work on paper. This method works just fine. So a couple things. Your phone, make sure that you have the brightness setting to about 80% of its total brightness. Just keep it standard. And you'll also want to make sure that any apps that fluctuate over the course of the day with brightness or color, things like that, are disabled. On the newer iPhones, there's an option for what's called, I think, True Tone or True Color, something similar, that will adjust the screen settings that you're seeing will be different than what the actual object that you're trying to photograph is. So you want to make sure and disable all of those things. I do also have a tripod. You don't have to use a tripod. You can hold the camera perfectly parallel above the print as steadily as you can and take a shot that way. If that is the method that you choose to use, make sure that you aren't using the timer like we'll be using with the tripod method. It actually tends to lead to more blurriness than not if you're trying to handhold it. And you'll notice I have the two front feet shortened so they can rest right on the table. And I've got this long third leg acting as sort of a kickstand of sorts, so it can stand on its own and remain stable, but also keep the phone mostly over the print, so I can actually get as the camera lens, which is actually right here, close to central over the image. So it just creates a nice way to photograph your work that's even and accurate to how it actually looks. Okay, so that's the general setup. Be careful which light you choose. Your natural window light, you don't want direct sunlight hitting your print. It tends to make these hot spots or flares, and it just blows out details and things that you don't want. So we have a sheer curtain over our window. It's not absolutely necessary, but it is helpful because it takes that pinpointed light and sort of disperses it. So then you get a nice cast of light over your print. The other thing to kind of note is what's outside your window. If there's construction going on, there's a big orange machine casting its own colors down onto your print, or some bright rhododendron or something, you might want to choose a different window. Okay, so I did mention the light coming in. There's a single source of light here for the most part. It's pretty bright on this edge of the print, and so I want to make sure that the whole print is a nice even lighting. This is the place to spend your time. And to do that, I'm going to use a little homemade reflector from the other half of that foam core and take this single source of light and reflect it back onto the shadows. I'm filling the light, so this homemade reflector is acting as a fill, and it's creating a lot more brightness over here. So what I can do now is sort of adjust the angles. I can pull it back farther, I can pull it in closer, I can angle it down, pull it back, and then kind of find that sweet spot of where light is reflecting the most effectively and giving you the most even light. It can be hard to tell on prints that are bleed prints or prints that don't have such a unified palette what even light looks like per se. It can be a little bit more of a subtle thing. So that's where this foam core kind of kicks in. It helps what you're viewing through your camera is the outside margin of the paper. So what you can do to make sure your lighting's even is just look around the outside of the print and just see that the color is the same. The whole reason we do this and we want even lighting is so that the color of the actual paper, the actual print or the canvas or whatever you're working on is as accurate to how we would see it in real life as possible, but in a digital image. So it's just a little trick, just kind of look around the border. So that's looking pretty good. Got it nice and filled. So this positioning looks great. Just kind of make sure that you've got everything squared up. You want the exterior portion of the margins that I just mentioned, the actual foam core that shows through with the cropping that you're selecting. And another thing with the newer iPhones, they tend to have sort of a fisheye effect. To help adjust that, you can just zoom in a tiny bit. Don't be dramatic about it, just like a tiny bit, and it helps eliminate a little bit of that curving that happens on the newer iPhones. So you've done that. You sort of adjusted again, making sure that the distance between these points on your image are even. That way you're not creating an odd trapezoidal shape of your print. You'll see this more in the next view I share with you guys. So that's looking pretty good. All the edges are nice and even. There's no strange tilting. My camera is parallel to the print. I feel confident in taking a photo. I've zoomed in just a tiny bit so that that fisheye effect is sort of eliminated. I've got my fill. Next, I just want to put on a timer just so that I don't have any shakiness. Hit the button. Make sure you're not touching it, and it'll take the image and be nice and stable. I wanted to show you guys directly on my screen what I was doing just then. So here are my settings. We've got brightness set around 80%. This is the True Tone feature. This is with it on. Make sure that's off. It just changes the coloring and it just makes it difficult to take accurate photos with it on. So that's in our settings. And then I was showing you guys how to use the camera. And that's just the basic app that comes on your phone here. And to make sure that it doesn't have sort of a trapezoidal feature like you see now. The distance at the top is a lot wider than the distance at the bottom from the paper to the edge. And now here's sort of an inverse of that. It's wider at the bottom on the margin, shorter at the top. I'm cropping way too close to that corner. Kind of rotate it. You can kind of play around. And the next thing I did was showed you guys the reflector, and that's that foam core piece you can see here. And just putting it right next to it and playing around with the angle, I'm really able to fill in a lot of the shadows that were present. So here's without, and then I bring it in really close, and now it's almost brighter than the right side where the light was coming in initially really strong. So this is just reflecting back the light a little too strongly on that left side here. You can see it's quite bright. So I'm just going to pull it back a little bit. One way you can kind of tell if your lighting's even enough or not is to look at the color of your foam core. All right, and what I'm going to show you next is another app that you can use called Lightroom CC, and it is free currently. It's part of the Adobe products and things, and so you can save the original raw files, you can save as a TIFF, you can also convert and save as a JPEG. So WB, that little dropper tool, you can actually select for sort of a neutral white, and one way you can do this without going out and buying a photo white card is, so click that little dropper, but you can sort of just use your your foam core. It's just considered a neutral surface, and just use that to kind of set. I mentioned a photo card. This is a photo card. It's just sort of a standard white. So that coloring is looking pretty good. Generally speaking, you can set your ISO. I would recommend around, somewhere between 100 and 200. Somewhere in there. Just kind of, I like it at about 200 for this case. Bring back the reflector. That looks pretty good to me. And here we go.